Good evening, Jamie of the Druid Diaries. I live in Treaty 7 territory. As a non-Indigenous person, I too am a treaty person, and I have equal responsibility to uphold that treaty as anyone else in this country who is benefiting from the treaties with Indigenous peoples here. This is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. There are many tribes within this confederacy, and right now I live most closely and am most closely associated with the Kainai First Nation. So, although I am not living on reserve, this is still the territory of these peoples. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, and acknowledging that and other groups such as the Métis within these territories is something that's formally done at the beginning of meetings, ceremonies, rituals all over Alberta. It is important. It's part of a whole movement across the country called reconciliation, because Canada has this treaty system, and we have departments within our federal government, departments that deal with treaties and the terms of the treaties and how those terms are fulfilled, for better or worse. And unfortunately, a lot of times they are not being fulfilled the way they should be, or at least they haven't in the past. We've had a much better year this year, where our federal government has made some real strides in striving to fulfill those promises properly, and that's good. So we're going to just have a chat about belonging and how Druidry and Druidism as a form of spirituality, and for a lot of us also a type of religion that is inspired by Indigenous spirituality that is rooted in Great Britain, whether it's ancestral to us as individuals or not. In my case, it is. How then do you transport an Indigenous religion or spirituality from one place where it sprouted from to another? And how do you share that? In my heart, especially since I was very blessed to have Indigenous teachers of this place and partake in ceremonies of this place and all of that, which is not the subject at hand, but it's a part of it. I believe that it doesn't matter what biological lineage you have or cultural background, that you can still, equal to anyone else, be part of the Druid tradition. So that's not the subject here. This is what we're getting at here, is that it's important to acknowledge that when you are not Indigenous to a place like Canada that has sprouted out of colonialism, and when you have treaties and a history of oppression, which we do have in Canada, and it continues, although it's really improving. We're making great strides, I feel, but we are not there yet. This is why this movement of reconciliation is so incredibly important. It's a process. It's going to take a really, really long time. It's going to take generations. We have to be committed, and we have to carry on, and we have to be aware. So if we don't want the practice of Druidism to be actually manifesting as an oppressive presence, a privileged presence, a entitled practice, then we have to really, really get rooted in the reality of the place we're in. This isn't about, not connecting with nature, universality. We are all a part of nature wherever we are on this planet as human beings. And not only that, but we belong to the earth. Wherever we are, we still belong to the earth. It's one planet. However, these hierarchical histories, of conflict, of broken promises, of social inequity, um, situations that have highly problematic social issues and cultural issues and legal issues too. And honestly, let's just say it straight up, issues around racism. A lot of issues around racism where I live. Racism towards Indigenous people, because, this is what I'm going to address here, because this is key to Druidry. If you, as a Druid, someone who is practicing Druidry, a student of Druidism, you, whether you're Indigenous to this place or not, really need to be mindful of the meaning of all this. And you're going to have to educate yourself. And there is no easy way to do that. You can read a book, one book, or maybe you speak with one Indigenous person if you're not Indigenous to this place. I just want to quickly point out that there are Indigenous people here that are interested in European paganism, right? Witches, people who have an interest in Druidism. And I don't know because I've never really asked, but I suspect there are people that have Indigenous North American heritage that are practicing Druidism or studying it. I know I certainly encounter them on the Facebook Druid groups, and they have a lot of great things to say when they speak up, and they're an important voice in Druidry. And I don't think that the main core big Druid organizations are really fully aware of yet. And I think we have a lot of work to do in this area. Unfortunately, a lot of non-natives are kind of used to rolling straight over this awkward bit, this very important bit. They just want to ignore that it's there. They may not just, they just feel terribly uncomfortable. They may feel really bad. Well, maybe if I don't look, it won't be there. It's just me and my personal private practice. What does this matter? This was all in the past. It's not in the past. It is not in the past. It is very present, like it was present tonight. Like it was present, I should say, earlier in the day, in a very deep personal way, as I held space for someone who is Indigenous, an Indigenous youth who was high on something. And I was very upset about this, not for myself. And I just wanted him to be safe and get some help. And he did, right? And I stayed out of his sight. And I just made sure he was going to be safe until help could come to him. And it worked out really, really well. Also, my family, my own children, have Indigenous heritage to this place. And there's just myriads of stories, myriads of experiences, that I could share with you. And that pales in comparison to the experiences of the Indigenous people of this place. So it's hard for a lot of non-Indigenous people to hear these stories, to bear witness to these experiences. Some are happy. Not every Indigenous person is suffering addiction or on the street. There's some incredibly resilient, successful people, uh, that are First Nations, that really, really needs to um, be made more conscious in the minds of non-Indigenous people, because sometimes there's a lot of stereotyping that goes on, a lot of assumptions, a lot of ignorance, really, a lot of ignorance, and a lot of us and them. And there's an old saying, just because you can does not mean you should. As practicing Druids, people learning and practicing Druidry, just because you can ignore these issues does not mean you should. Belonging, there's many ways to belong. When I first traveled through this area, I was traveling with my aunties and my uncle, and I just got this feeling out of the blue, oh, home, and I just like felt it really deep in my heart. And I looked up, and there was the prairie, and I was passing um, what I would later find out was the northernmost end of the Blood Tribes territory. Now, remembering, please, that this whole area, southern Alberta, is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot people. The Kainai Blood Tribe is part of that Blackfoot Confederacy. So, you can feel heart things, but that doesn't mean that you should enact any form of entitlement. And I think it's really important to remain humble. And just because you own a house or a property or a condo in this area doesn't mean that you should take on this sense of entitlement. This is still the traditional territory of these people. There is a treaty, goes back to I believe it's Queen Victoria. She made the treaty for this area. Here, this is really important. And so before like municipal meetings, gatherings, university functions, all different kinds of things like this, there is now always an acknowledgement given to where we reside. And that acknowledgement covers the fact this is not our land. We share space on land that is not our own. There's so many facets to this, I just can't cover all in one go. And I do really prefer to just like, rather than plan out, something very specific for these videos, it's important to me, pardon me, at this point, that they are totally natural vlogs and spontaneous. Even if I do a few retakes, it's got to have that real, natural, from my heart kind of reality with it. So it does mean that they're a bit scattered. Maybe one day I'll make them more formal, but right now this is the way it is. So speaking from my heart, I'm very aware of all this, and I also don't like it when I see non-natives ignore it. And I'm not saying you absolutely have to say the words all the time, but you need to feel it in your heart. There's a lot of judgment around these things, and I think that's unfortunate in a certain sense, because people have to walk their own path and they have to grow. And we can't just assume that everybody should be on the page that I or you are on at any given time. But it is a dialogue that needs to happen, even if it's just private between you, yourself, and the mirror of your spirit and mind. I'm getting scattered now. But, so I kind of get back on track. That, although I have very powerful longings to connect with my ancestral blood and bone ancestral land, And I actually did go through, and I feel I'm coming out of it now, a type of grieving, an actual grieving for that land. That is not weird. I think, especially for someone like myself that's hyper aware that I am benefiting from an entitled colonialist presence as a non-Indigenous person to place. Because I'm very earth-based, I think it's perfectly natural to long, to connect, to be with, upon a land where that is not an issue for me. And I think that's absolutely reasonable. And I think people who are trying to understand this and who might be kind of judgy about it, they need to understand the peace that comes with that. Because when you are really aware, when you're considerate, you're respectful, you're humble, that the land you reside in has suffered this pain and is still suffering this pain, and the people that are Indigenous to place here are still suffering the strife attached to that whole history in the current time in which we live. The residue, the generational trauma, the inequities, the struggle for treaty rights to be honored, the struggle with the racism, the struggle with the ignorance. This struggle is not past. It's not in the past. Some people have a harder time with it than others. Some people are not coping well at all. And there's a lot of blaming and desire to ignore. You know, when you recognize that all of this is current, it's not something that, ooh, we waved a little magic wand and, oh, don't need to worry about that. Wrong, 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 wrong. When you recognize that and you're striving to practice an earth-based spirituality, imagine how that is stressful. Okay? I feel empathy for the Indigenous people here. Deep, profound empathy. For me to stand in my practice here, in that humility, I carry that with me all the time, that awareness. I can't lose that awareness. It's integral to my integrity, to truth, all these things with which I honor as someone who is practicing Druidry, who is someone of an earth-based spirituality. You know, if I don't do this, am I authentic? No, I'm not. How can I be an earth-based spiritual person without being authentic in my empathy for the Indigenous people of place and their past and present and potentially future oppression and their suffering? I also celebrate their successes. I stand in solidarity with them. But you think that's easy? So, of course, when I think of, and I've never been over the ocean ever, but when I think of standing by standing stones that I know my ancestors stood by, and possibly that my actual blood and bone ancestors may have helped raise, can you understand, those of you that are in Britain, those of you in those beautiful Druid organizations over there that we count on so much, can you understand what a relief that is to stand in the place of your ancestors and not carry that consciousness? Like, I don't have to worry. Like, if I was standing over there, I would not feel as an interloper. This doesn't mean you feel as an interloper to the land. This is about human relationships, history, place memories. The place memories, the far greater vastness of time, is the place memory of the Indigenous peoples here. The majority of my ancestry as I understand it, is from the British Isles. It's from Scotland, Ireland, a little bit of what is now the South, England, and don't get me started on the oppressive aspects towards Wales, but also a little bit into, like so many people of British ancestry, a little bit into Northern Europe. It's just, you know, not to have to constantly feel that, it's a relief. So I think, just in those terms, for someone like me, of course, there's going to be a longing. I'm not saying that I want to run away from these issues. I strive really hard to um, be a healing presence. And even just by standing in solidarity to uh, strive not to be part of the problem, to some Indigenous people, just to be a non-Indigenous person in North America is being part of the problem. No matter how nice you are, no matter how much how please, in some people's minds, just please go back to your place of origin, your ancestors' origin. Just go back, leave us. And there are people who really feel like that. Then there's the 7 generations uh, belief that once your family, wherever you're from in the world, once your family has been in North America on Turtle Island for 7 generations, you become naturalized into this place. And then there are people, they're just like going to accept you for who you are as, belonging here, we're together. And and this is so individual. And everyone finds their own way to cope with this. And unfortunately, too many just ignore it on the non-Indigenous side. But I just really, really, if any of members overseas happen to listen to my little talk here, I hope you understand, especially if you have, a psychologist background. You have my respect. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but I think somebody needs to really just honestly tell you this, and I feel like you're looking for this. And I've heard some fancy references just generally, and some offensive things from other sources outside of what I'm referring to right now. This is not pointing fingers, but say that like there's something wrong with people if they feel this longing, spiritual longing for ancestral place. No, not necessarily. I think it's consciousness. I think it's being conscious, aware, having empathy, having heart, not wanting to intrude. I think it's respect. I think that's a very healthy characteristic, is to have empathy and respect. These are good character traits. Please understand, it's a complex situation. And anyone who's an ethical, empathetic, conscious, mindful practitioner of Druidry has got to face these harsh realities, and they are harsh. When you see someone, especially a young person, um, really suffering from things that are a consequence of the systems imposed upon this land, we can't let these people down. Can't just ride over them and ignore the reality and pretend it isn't there. So please understand that if we long for our ancestral connection in any physical term, it's so that we can rest. Some people will call this guilt. I don't think what I feel is guilt. I think what I feel is profound respect for these people. And I think it's really tragic, really deeply, terribly tragic and sad that especially people whose ancestors went through great brutality. And I am studying the history of the UK. I am really, really looking at it. And I'm thinking, what pain, what trauma is there? Great pain, great trauma. And I haven't been there. I don't know anyone except for a couple of my cousins in person that, you know, is living there and some friends I've made online. But I can see there's a lot of work to be done all the way around. I look at the Welsh, I look at the Scottish, I look at the Irish. I think about the struggle of trying to save languages over in Britain. Manx. These languages are important. These identities are important. I look at the damage it's done to Indigenous people here, the loss of language, the damage to Indigenous spirituality, culture, and what that did to people here. It's awful. It's really, truly horrible. And the damage that it continues to do, and the incredible struggle to bring back these languages from the brink of extinction. The Pictish language is extinct. Can I learn Pictish dances? Can I learn Pictish ritual? One of my grandmothers claimed Pictish heritage. She also had Irish. And let me tell you, it took me a while to find this out. I just think it's really, really something that we all need to dig deep with. I love Druidry. I have a profound respect for uh, these organizations that are making it accessible to us around the world. And I have a real respect for all of you. I really, really do, but I don't think you really know. This is really important for everyone in Druidry to address, is the unacknowledged pain of trauma within the UK regarding Indigenous cultures, languages, tribes, the loss there. I don't know you. And maybe you do feel all these things, but I don't know that you feel these things. You're striving to build something really, really wonderful. And I'm totally with you on this. But this subject keeps popping up. And you know, there are people that don't care about this. They don't feel it. I am probably going to be moving out of this area in the near future. And I was thinking how I will miss my communion with the plants and special places that I go to here. But I will connect with the plants and special places that I will go to where I'm moving next as well. It just takes time to build relationships with the land. Some things happen quickly, and other things have to be earned. And I will give offerings. I will speak to the land and the plants that I love. And I will move forward in my growth, and I'll carry that spirit of love and connection and openness to wherever I go. And I will make friends of the land where I go, and the plants and the animals therein. But I will not wash over in any way or take for granted where I am.